The man accused of killing his wife and injuring his mother earlier this year in Readfield has been found not criminally responsible for his actions. A judge ruled 34-year-old Samuel Whittemore of Belfast will be placed in the custody of DHHS to be held in a state psychiatric facility. During today's hearing, two psychiatrists both came to the conclusion that Whittemore suffers from bipolar I disorder with psychiatric features and claimed he was in a state of delusion during the crimes, which took place at his parents' home. Statements from friends and family of Margot Whittemore, who was 32 when she was killed, were read in the courtroom. They say she was kind and loved life, and Whittemore should be sent to prison for life rather than a mental institution. Whittemore can return to court in the future in hopes of being released from the psychiatric facility.
I just wanted to let Margot's family know that public safety is an incredibly important part of those hearings, and they are taken very seriously by the parties and particularly by the judges who have to make those very difficult decisions.
Those who spoke on behalf of the victim asked not to be filmed, but many came from France to speak and be part of the emotional hearing.